The thunderclap startled Grace O'Sullivan as she hurried down the muddy main street of Silver Creek, Colorado, in the pouring rain of 1878, her threadbare shawl providing little protection against the elements. Her trembling hands clutched a small leather pouch containing everything she owned in the world: a wedding band, a locket with her mother's portrait, and $3.17. At 18, she had never imagined being alone like this, cast out from her family, with nowhere to turn. "Watch where you're going, miss." A gruff voice called as she nearly collided with a man leading his horse through the downpour. "I am sorry," Grace mumbled, stepping aside, her soaked boots sinking deeper into the mud. Her gaze remained fixed on the ground, afraid to meet anyone's eyes. In a town this small, word traveled fast, and she was certain everyone knew about the O'Sullivan girl who had defied her father by marrying young Billy Thompson against his wishes, only to lose her husband to pneumonia barely 3 months later. The rain intensified as Grace made her way toward the edge of town. The widow Jenkins had allowed her to stay in her spare room for the past week, but today she had regretfully informed Grace that her sister was arriving, and the room would no longer be available. Grace understood a young widow with a questionable reputation was not someone most respectable folks wanted to associate with. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by another deafening crack of thunder. Grace jumped, losing her footing on the slick mud and tumbling to the ground. She landed hard, her pouch flying from her grasp and spilling its meager contents onto the sodden earth. "No, no, no," she cried, scrambling to gather her treasures before they were ruined or lost forever. Her fingers closed around the wedding band and the locket, but as she reached for the money, a boot stepped into her field of vision. "Let me help you there, miss," came a deep, gentle voice. Grace looked up through rain-soaked lashes to see a tall figure bending down beside her. He retrieved her coins from the mud and carefully placed them back in the pouch before offering his hand. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. "Thank you, sir," Grace said, allowing him to help her to her feet. Her dress was now completely muddied, and she felt a flush of embarrassment at her bedraggled appearance. "Yancy Jackson," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "And you look like you could use a dry place to wait out this storm." Grace clutched her pouch tightly. I am fine, Mr. Jackson. Just on my way." She hesitated, realizing she had nowhere to go. Yancy studied her face, his blue eyes kind but assessing. "The saloon's got a covered porch. Not the most respectable place for a lady, but it'll keep the rain off while we figure something better out." Before Grace could respond, he removed his long duster coat and held it out above her head as a makeshift umbrella. "Come on now. Can't have you catching your death out here." The mention of death sent a sharp pain through Grace's heart, reminding her of Billy's final days, racked with fever and coughing until there was blood on his handkerchief. She nodded mutely and allowed Yancy to guide her toward the saloon. The porch was mercifully empty, the usual patrons having taken shelter inside, where piano music and raucous laughter spilled out whenever the swinging doors opened. Yancy shook the water from his hat and motioned to a bench against the wall. "Sit yourself down. I'll be right back." Grace wanted to protest, to tell him she didn't need charity, but the words stuck in her throat as he disappeared through the saloon doors. She sank onto the bench, her entire body trembling from cold and exhaustion. True to his word, Yancy returned moments later with 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee," he explained, handing one to her. "Got some whiskey in it, too. For medicinal purposes only, you understand." Grace accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping her frozen fingers around its warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Just Yancy is fine," he replied, settling beside her with a respectful distance between them. "Now, you want to tell me what's got you wandering around in a storm with nowhere to go?" Grace took a sip of the coffee, the whiskey burning a path down her throat and spreading warmth through her chest. She rarely drank spirits, but at that moment, she was thankful for its numbing effect. "My name is Grace O'Sullivan. Or rather, it was Grace Thompson, but..." She swallowed hard. "My husband died 3 months ago." Yancy nodded slowly. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that. My father, Seamus O'Sullivan, warned me not to marry Billy. Said we were too young, that Billy would never amount to anything." Grace stared into her coffee. When I went against his wishes, father disowned me. Said I was dead to him and the rest of the family. Harsh words, Yancy commented. I thought, after Billy died, that perhaps they would take me back. Grace's voice cracked. I went to the house yesterday, but father turned me away. Said I made my choice and now I must live with it. Yancy's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. I have been staying with Widow Jenkins, but she needs her room back. I have just enough money for maybe 2 nights at the hotel, and then. Grace trailed off, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. The rain continued to pound on the porch roof as they sat in silence. Finally, Yancy spoke, his voice thoughtful. I've got a proposition for you, Mrs. Thompson. Grace looked up sharply, her guard immediately rising. She had heard such offers before in the weeks since Billy's death, thinly veiled suggestions that always ended with her virtue being compromised. Seeing her expression, Yancy quickly clarified. Nothing improper, I assure you. I own a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's not much, but I've been looking for someone to help with the cooking and housekeeping. You want to hire me? Grace asked, surprised. The place is a mess, I won't lie. Been living like a bachelor too long. Yancy took a drink from his mug. There's a small cabin on the property where you could stay. It was meant for ranch hands, but I've not hired any yet. You'd have your privacy. Grace studied him carefully. Yancy Jackson appeared to be in his late 20s, with honest eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His clothes were dusty but well-maintained, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. Why would you do this for a stranger? She asked suspiciously. Yancy's lips curved in a slight smile. Let's just say I know what it's like to be alone in the world with nowhere to turn. Besides, he added, I'm tired of my own cooking. Grace couldn't help but smile back, the first genuine smile to cross her face in months. I should warn you, she said. I am not the best cook. My mother tried to teach me, but I was always more interested in books than kitchens. Yancy chuckled. Can't be worse than what I manage. Do you know how to make coffee and fry bacon without burning it black? I can manage that much. Then you're hired, Mrs. Thompson. Yancy extended his hand. What do you say? Ready to start over? Grace hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Grace, she corrected him. Just Grace is fine. The rain was still falling steadily the next morning when Yancy's wagon pulled up in front of the Widow Jenkins' house. Grace had spent her last night there packing her few belongings and saying goodbye to the kind older woman who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. You be careful out there, child, Mrs. Jenkins said, pressing a small package of biscuits into Grace's hands. Mr. Jackson seems decent enough, but you're all alone out there. I will be fine, Grace assured her, though her own heart fluttered with uncertainty. The job is a blessing, and I am grateful for it. Yancy helped load her single trunk into the wagon, then offered his hand to assist her onto the seat. The journey to his ranch was largely silent, with Grace huddled beneath a tarp to stay dry, while Yancy guided the horses through the muddy road. When they finally arrived, Grace's heart sank slightly at the sight before her. The main house was a modest 2-story structure that had clearly seen better days. Paint peeled from the wooden siding, and one of the shutters hung askew. The yard was overgrown, with various tools and supplies scattered about, suggesting a certain level of disorganization. Told you it wasn't much, Yancy said, seeming to read her thoughts. Been focusing more on the cattle than the house. It has good bones, Grace replied diplomatically, remembering her mother's saying that any house could become a home with enough care. Yancy showed her to the cabin, first a small but solid structure with a single room containing a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a washstand. It was simple but clean, and Grace felt a wave of relief at having a space to call her own. I'll let you get settled, Yancy said, setting her trunk down. Come up to the main house when you're ready, and we can discuss your duties. Once alone, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself. She had dreamed of a cozy home with Billy, perhaps children someday. Now, at 18, she was a widow working as a housekeeper for a bachelor rancher she barely knew. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry before wiping her eyes, straightening her dress, and walking toward the main house, determined to make the best of her situation. The interior of Yancy's home was every bit as chaotic as she had imagined. Dishes were piled in the sink, Clothes were draped over furniture, and a fine layer of dust covered nearly every surface. Yancy stood in the middle of the main room, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Been meaning to tidy up," he said, hastily gathering some papers from the table. Grace rolled up her sleeves. "Well, Mr. Jackson, it seems I have my work cut out for me. Where would you like me to begin?" For the next week, Grace threw herself into transforming the ranch house. She scrubbed floors, washed mountains of laundry, organized Yancy's haphazard collection of books and papers, and attempted to bring order to the kitchen. The work was exhausting but satisfying, giving her purpose and keeping her mind occupied during the day. At night, alone in her cabin, she still cried for Billy and the life they'd planned together, but the tears came less frequently as the days passed. Yancy was gone most days from sunrise until dusk, tending to his small herd of cattle and making repairs around the property. When he returned each evening, he expressed genuine appreciation for Grace's efforts, often standing in doorways marveling at the transformation of rooms he'd neglected for years. "Never thought this place could look so civilized," he commented one evening, running his hand over the now polished dining table. "You're working miracles, Grace." Grace felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "It just needed some attention, that is all." As the weeks passed, they settled into a comfortable routine. Grace would have breakfast ready by the time Yancy came in from his early morning chores, and dinner waiting when he returned in the evening. Sometimes they ate in comfortable silence, both tired from the day's work. Other times, Yancy would share stories about his cattle or news from town when he made supply runs. Grace learned that Yancy had come to Colorado 5 years earlier, purchasing the struggling ranch with money he'd saved working as a trail hand. He was originally from Texas, but had left home young after disagreements with his own father. "Guess we both know something about family troubles," he remarked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The summer air was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant lowing of cattle. "Do you ever think of reconciling with your father?" Grace asked, her thoughts turning to her own family. She hadn't seen or heard from them since that rainy day when her father had turned her away. Yancy was quiet for a long moment. "My pa died 2 years ago. Never got the chance to make things right." "I am sorry," Grace said softly. "That's life in the West," Yancy replied, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "People come and go, sometimes without proper goodbyes." As summer gave way to autumn, Grace found herself looking forward to their evening conversations. Yancy was unlike any man she'd known before, thoughtful and measured in his speech, with an unexpected appreciation for poetry. She discovered this one rainy afternoon when she found a collection of Wordsworth tucked between practical manuals on cattle breeding and fence repair. "My mother's influence," he explained when Grace mentioned it, a hint of embarrassment coloring his features. She believed a man should cultivate his mind as well as his land. "She sounds like a wise woman," Grace replied. "Would you read some to me sometime? I had to leave my books behind when I left home." That evening, Yancy read aloud by lamplight, his deep voice giving new life to words Grace had only ever read to herself. It became another part of their routine, reading together after dinner on evenings when the work was done early enough. October brought the cattle drive to market in Denver, and Yancy was gone for nearly 2 weeks. Grace was surprised by how empty and quiet the ranch felt in his absence. She kept busy with preserving the last of the garden harvest and deep cleaning areas of the house she hadn't yet tackled, but each evening she found herself looking down the road, wishing to see Yancy's familiar figure returning. When he finally did return, the relief that flooded through her was so intense it nearly took her breath away. He rode in just before sunset, dusty and tired, but with a broad smile that made Grace's heart skip. "Sold the steers for a good price," he announced, swinging down from his horse. "Enough to get us through winter with some to spare." The casual "us" did not escape Grace's notice, and she found herself smiling at the implication that she was now part of the ranch's future. Yancy reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something from Denver." Grace untied the string carefully and gasped when she saw what was inside: a beautiful leather-bound copy of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. "You mentioned it was your favorite," Yancy said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "The bookseller said it was a new edition." "It is perfect," Grace whispered, running her fingers over the embossed cover. No one had given her a gift since Billy's modest wedding ring, and that had been pawned weeks ago to buy food. That night, as Grace lay in her bed in the cabin, she held the book to her chest and faced a truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was developing feelings for Yancy Jackson. The realization brought both joy and guilt. Was it disloyal to Billy's memory to care for another man so soon? And even if it wasn't, would Yancy ever see her as anything more than his housekeeper, a charity case he had rescued from the rain? The first snow of winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in white overnight. Grace awoke to find Yancy already outside, clearing paths between the buildings and checking on the livestock. She watched him from her cabin window, admiring the strength in his shoulders as he worked. When he came in for breakfast, his cheeks ruddy from cold, he announced, "Storm's coming. A big one, according to old Pete in town. We should prepare." They spent the day securing the property, bringing in extra firewood, checking the integrity of the barn roof, and making sure there were ample supplies in case they were snowed in. By evening, the wind had picked up considerably, howling around the eaves of the house and driving snow against the windows. "You should stay in the main house tonight," Yancy said as they finished dinner. "That cabin won't hold heat well in a blizzard this severe." Grace hesitated, aware of the impropriety of staying under the same roof as an unmarried man, but also recognizing the practical truth of his words. "Perhaps I could sleep by the kitchen stove?" "Take my room," Yancy insisted. "I'll bunk down here by the fire." The blizzard raged for 3 days, confining them to the house. They passed the time with reading, mending clothes, and long conversations that stretched late into the night. Grace learned more about Yancy's dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, perhaps growing crops on the eastern section of the property, maybe even building a proper orchard someday. "It is a good dream," Grace said sincerely, "to build something lasting." "Been thinking it would be nice to have someone to build it with," Yancy replied, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. Grace felt her breath catch in her throat. "Yancy," a tremendous crash from outside interrupted whatever she might have said. Yancy was on his feet immediately, reaching for his coat. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing a lantern. "You cannot go out in this." Grace protested, but he was already forcing the door open against the driving snow. Terrified he would be lost in the blizzard, Grace paced by the window, straining to see anything in the swirling whiteness. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 15 minutes, the door burst open again, and Yancy stumbled in, snow-covered but safe. "Part of the barn roof gave way," he explained, shaking off his coat. "Had to move the horses to the back section." Relief made Grace's knees weak, and before she could think better of it, she threw her arms around him. "I was so worried." Yancy stood frozen for a moment. Then slowly his arms came around her, returning the embrace. "I'm all right," he murmured into her hair. "Just cold." Grace stepped back, embarrassed by her impulsive action. "Let me make you some coffee to warm up." As she busied herself at the stove, she could feel Yancy's eyes on her, but neither of them spoke of the moment they had shared. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to find the world transformed. Snow drifted higher than the fence posts in some places, and the damage to the barn was worse than Yancy had initially assessed. They spent the next several days working side by side to repair it, with Grace holding boards in place while Yancy hammered. "You're stronger than you look," he commented when she helped him lift a heavy beam into place. "Farm girl," she reminded him with a smile. "My brothers never let me use being female as an excuse to avoid work." The mention of her brothers brought a shadow to her eyes, and Yancy noticed. "You miss them," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. Grace nodded. "Christmas is coming. It will be my first without family." That evening, Yancy was unusually quiet during dinner. When Grace asked if something was bothering him, he seemed to come to a decision. "Get your coat," he said abruptly. "I want to show you something." Puzzled, Grace followed him outside. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky above. Yancy led her to a small rise behind the main house, where a single pine tree stood silhouetted against the starlight. "Been thinking about what you said about Christmas," he began, his breath visible in the cold air. "Thought maybe we could cut this tree, bring it inside. Have a proper Christmas, just the two of us." Grace was touched by the gesture. "I would like that very much." Yancy shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. There's something else I've been meaning to say, Grace. Her heart began to beat faster as he turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. These past months with you here have been the best of my life, he said earnestly. I know you came here just looking for work, for a place to stay after everything you lost. But I've come to care for you as more than just someone who keeps my house in order. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Yancy, I'm not asking anything of you, he hurried to add. I know it's still fresh, your loss. I know your heart might not be ready, but I wanted you to know that when it is, if it ever is, I'm here. And I'd count myself the luckiest man in Colorado territory if you'd consider making this arrangement of ours more permanent. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek, freezing in the cold air. I have been so afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what? Yancy asked gently. Afraid that what I was feeling was wrong, that it was too soon after Billy. Afraid that you only saw me as someone to pity. Yancy's hands tightened around hers. Grace O'Sullivan Thompson, there is not a single thing about you that inspires pity. Admiration, yes. Respect, absolutely. And feeling's a good deal stronger than that, if I'm being honest. Grace smiled through her tears. I care for you too, Yancy. So much that it frightens me sometimes. He released one of her hands to gently wipe a tear from her cheek. Then we can be frightened together. No need to rush anything. We've got time. As they stood there under the starlight, Grace felt something she had thought lost forever, hope for the future, and the first flutterings of a new love taking root in her heart. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed slowly, like the first careful growth after a hard winter. Yancy was patient, never pushing for more than Grace was ready to give. They shared meals, conversations, and occasionally, when the moment felt right, a brief touch of hands or a lingering glance that spoke volumes. Christmas came, bringing with it the pine tree they had cut together and decorated with simple ornaments fashioned from pine cones, ribbons, and bits of colored paper. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged modest gifts: a new hat Grace had secretly ordered from the general store for Yancy, and a beautiful hand-carved wooden box from him, perfect for storing her treasured locket and other small keepsakes. There's something else, Yancy said after she had admired the box. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded letter. I rode into town yesterday. This was waiting at the post office. Grace took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing her younger sister's handwriting on the envelope. Eileen, she whispered, breaking the seal. The letter was brief, but filled with news from home. Their mother had been ill, but was recovering. The winter had been harsh on the farm. And most surprisingly, their father had begun to soften his stance regarding Grace. He asks about you, Eileen had written. Never directly, mind you, but I see him looking at your empty chair at supper. Pride is a terrible thing, Grace, but even pride can weaken with time. Perhaps someday. Grace wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. My sister says there might be hope for reconciliation someday. Yancy smiled. That's good news, isn't it? Yes, Grace agreed, folding the letter carefully. But it also makes me realize something. What's that? That while I miss my family and would welcome their forgiveness, I do not regret the path that led me here. She looked up at Yancy, her eyes clear and certain. Even with all the pain and loss, I cannot regret finding you. Yancy's expression softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand. Nor I you. Winter slowly gave way to spring, bringing new life to the ranch. Yancy expanded his herd with calves born during the late winter months, and Grace planted a vegetable garden near her cabin, enjoying the simple pleasure of coaxing life from the soil. They were in town one bright April day, purchasing supplies and delivering a letter to Eileen, when Grace encountered her father for the first time since he had turned her away nearly a year before. She froze in the middle of the general store as Seamus O'Sullivan entered, his tall frame blocking the doorway momentarily before he too stopped short at the sight of his daughter. Grace felt Yancy move protectively to her side, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. The gesture was not lost on Seamus, whose eyes flickered between them with undisguised curiosity. Father, Grace said formally, finding her voice at last. Grace, Seamus replied, his tone gruff but not unkind. You are looking well. An awkward silence stretched between them until Grace remembered her manners. Father, this is Yancy Jackson. Yancy, my father, Seamus O'Sullivan. The men nodded to each other, sizing one another up with the wariness of territorial animals. Finally, Seamus spoke again. Your mother asks after you. She would like to see you, if you've a mind to visit. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. I would like that very much. Seamus nodded stiffly. Sunday dinner, perhaps. Next week. He glanced at Yancy. Your friend is welcome as well. With that, he tipped his hat and moved past them to speak with the shopkeeper, the conversation clearly over for now. Outside in the bright sunshine, Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was unexpected. Yancy squeezed her hand. Small steps. It's a beginning. The Sunday dinner at the O'Sullivan farm was tense, but civil. Grace's mother wept upon seeing her, embracing her tightly and whispering apologies in her ear. Her brothers were awkwardly friendly, and even Seamus made an effort, asking Yancy detailed questions about his ranch and seeming genuinely interested in the answers. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It will never be the same, she said thoughtfully, but at least there is a bridge being built. Bridges are good, Yancy replied. They let you cross back and forth as needed. The seasons turned, summer arrived in all its glory, and with it came a day Grace would remember for the rest of her life. She and Yancy had ridden to a nearby stream for a picnic, enjoying the respite from the summer heat beneath the shade of cottonwood trees. After they had eaten, Yancy suggested a walk along the stream bank. They strolled hand in hand, pointing out interesting stones or the occasional fish darting in the clear water. When they reached a particularly beautiful spot where the stream widened into a small pool, Yancy stopped. Grace, he said, his voice unusually solemn. There's something I need to ask you. Her heart began to race as he took both her hands in his. Yes, she prompted when he seemed to struggle for words. I've been practicing this speech for weeks, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Had it all worked out, but now that the moment's here, I can't recall a word of it. Grace squeezed his hands encouragingly. Just say what is in your heart. Yancy took a deep breath. When you came to my ranch that rainy day, I thought I was just offering shelter to someone in need. I never imagined you'd end up sheltering me right back from loneliness, from a life half-lived. You've brought light and laughter and purpose to each day. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold ring. I'm asking if you'll make it official. If you'll be my wife, my partner in everything. I know it hasn't been that long since Billy, and if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Grace O'Sullivan, and I want to build a life with you. Tears of joy spilled down Grace's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed to whisper, Yes, yes, I will marry you, Yancy Jackson. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace felt the final pieces of her heart heal and reform into something new, not forgetting the past, but ready to embrace the future with the man she had come to love with all her being. They were married in late September, with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainsides. The ceremony took place on the ranch, with Reverend Miller officiating and a small gathering of friends and family in attendance. To Grace's surprise and joy, her entire family came, including her father, who gruffly but sincerely gave her away. He's a good man, Seamus acknowledged as he walked her toward where Yancy waited. Better than I judged him to be at first glance. Thank you, Father, Grace replied, squeezing his arm. That means a great deal to me. The celebration afterward was simple but joyous, with tables set up in the yard and music provided by a fiddler from town. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they now shared, Yancy pulled Grace aside for a moment of privacy. Happy, Mrs. Jackson? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. More than I ever thought possible, she replied truthfully. When my family cast me out, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. Yancy kissed her softly. We've started over together, and the best is yet to come. As they rejoined their guests, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of loss and rejection to the heights of love and acceptance, her path had been neither straight nor easy. But standing beside Yancy, surrounded by both his steadfast support and the family she had thought lost to her forever, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worthwhile. For in finding the courage to start over, she had discovered not just a new beginning, but a love strong enough to last a lifetime.